Okay, so it's time for a follow-up to the follow-up to the follow-up. I had actually started this video a while back. It's technically a follow-up to that Q&A I did about adding weight versus reps. And then I realized while I was making it that I needed some background, which is why I went back and did the single, double, triple progression, doing it across multiple sets, and then adding weight. So I'm back to it. And I want to look at just a bunch of sort of miscellaneous topics, some of which are just expansions on things that I said previously, relative to this idea of, how these percentages work out and this percentage 1RM relationship. And I'm going to touch on a bunch of sort of semi-related things so I can hopefully close this topic out and get back to something else. So in that last video about micro-loading small exercises, I offered an option for plate stack machines, where you use the pin to hang a plate off the machine to get intermediate jumps that look like this. And I mentioned they can be a little bit precarious and it makes it a little bit difficult to get certain jumps. And of course, someone in my group said, well, Lyle, you forgot to include this, and put up a picture of this next thing. This is just a commercial version of what I showed with the standard pin, and you slide it into the plate stack, and you've got plenty of room to hang standard weight plates off of. And that's great. I told the guy, believe it or not, I don't actually keep up with every single toy that gets made in this industry, and since my powerlifter doesn't have plate stack machines, I don't pay attention to this kind of shit. Regardless, it's not that expensive. It was like 20, 25 bucks. I'm sure it works better than what I showed. Though I really do think it's more for people that need to hang like 25s and 45s off of a weight stack. I mean, look at how long that thing is. When they've maxed out a plate stack, then really to add a 2.5 and a 5, I mean, it'll work for that, but it seems kind of like overkill. It's more shit to carry to the gym. I suppose if you do have plate stack machines in your home gym, this would be worth it. I've never seen one in a commercial gym ever, so it's great. Get one, I guess, or just learn to hang it off of the standard pin like I do. Moving on. Okay, so back to the plot. I want to kind of go back to the issue that I brought up however many videos back ago in terms of, that rep percentage relationship and why adding reps can often be as if not more difficult than adding weight to the bar, depending on whether that one rep equal roughly 2 to 3% is more or less than the weight increments you have available, right? If you've got weight increments that allow you to make very small increases, like all the micro-loading options I described in the last video, you may be able to add weight. And if you only have fairly large weight increments that may be 5, 10% or more of what's on the bar, adding reps may be easier. But I wanted to re-examine that because in a theoretical sense, let's say that you were gaining 1% strength per week. No, it doesn't work that way. That's not how strength gains work. Just stick with me conceptually. So let's say you're gaining 1% strength per week. Adding 1 rep per set is roughly the equivalent of a 2 to 3% gain. That means it'll take 2 to 3 weeks to add a single repetition, which is about what that study I cited found, right? Like squats went up a little bit faster. It was 1 rep every week and a half, but let's not forget, many of the individuals were new to squats, so they were gaining strength more rapidly because apparently researchers in this field can't think far enough ahead to come up with non-shitty study designs. Leg extensions went up about 1 rep every other week, so it's in that range. So let's ask the question, what if there was a way to add 1% to the bar to match that 1%, again, hypothetical, theoretical, stay out of my ass on this, strength gain per week? Here's an example. Let's say you're squatting 225 pounds. 1% is 2.25 pounds. What if you could add 2.25 pounds to the bar? That's 1%. In theory, again, it doesn't work out this way. So don't go around going, Lyle said you can do this. This is just kind of a concept thing. In theory, you could add a small amount of weight to the bar each week, and it would basically match your adaptation rate. And with microplates, that is possible. And I gave a bunch of examples in that last video, but with a total microplate set, you can technically put on as little as half a pound total to the bar, which is even less than 1%. You wouldn't even feel it. Now, I mentioned the pros and cons. If you're in a commercial gym, the plate variance is going to be more than that. But if you have completely standardized plates, in premise, you could do that, or you could add a pound by adding a half pound to each side. Or I mentioned with her bench press, when she got close to her limits, I never added more than 2.5 pounds total So 1.25 pounds to each side. So in theory, again, I'm not saying that you can necessarily do this because strength gains aren't linear like this. But in theory, this solves the problem. And it applies to the other exercises. So back to the dumbbell example. A 5-pound jump with 25-pound dumbbells is a huge 20% increase. But if you could add 1 pound to each side, that's only 4%, which means that it might take you 4 weeks to be able to add that a single repetition. Whereas if you had a 1 pound increment, you could probably add that every other week. And I explained how to do that too, using wrist weights. The plate mate's 1.25, put 1 on each side, and that's workable too. So you kind of get the idea that in premise, at least, if you have small enough weight increments and your weights are accurate enough so that the variance is not greater than the micro increments, you can technically probably add weight almost weekly in tiny enough amounts. So kind of, again, in sort of a hypothetical physiological sense, from the standpoint of adding weight versus adding reps, it'd be much easier to add very small amounts of weight on a weekly basis than it might be to add repetitions. And if any of y'all are old enough to remember, the old hard gainer philosophy, you would do this for months on end, where you kind of use larger jumps initially. As you got closer or above your maxes, you would just add these tiny amounts of weight to the bar for as long as you could handle it, as you just entered the training equivalent of the long dark tea time of the soul, with a nod to Douglas Adams. Even assuming you could do this with some sort of accuracy, if the bigger plates you have are actually consistent in weight, if you train at home or whatever, we might ask if it's a valuable practice. Is it better to try to add 1 pound a week versus just waiting 4 weeks and adding a larger amount? On some exercises, even if you wait 3 to 4 weeks for the adaptation, you might still have to break out the microplates, depending on the exercise, for the reasons that I've given previously. So again, just kind of a hypothetical, speculative idea, going back to the idea of adding weight versus reps, is that in premise, if you had small enough increments, and you can with some of the microloading options, you can probably add that much more quickly than you can add that rep, which represents 2 to 3%. All right, moving on. So next I wanted to expand on a throwaway statement I made however many videos ago it was, on why I thought that percentage-based training programs suck. And this all goes back to that chart, that supposed percentage of 1RM repetition relationship, which the one I presented was an average, and they are all averages, but there can be significant variance, where at any given percentage, the number of repetitions, maximum repetitions that have been done, can be significantly different. And this depends on the exercise being done, the muscle group, how the person has been trained, endurance versus strength power athletes. There can be frequently sex differences, and sometimes there's just individual differences. And sometimes these differences are just staggering. And you'll test people's maximum number of repetitions at a given percentage, and it'll be like the average is 12, and some people will get 8, and other people will get like in the 20s and 30s. Frequently, again, women frequently on lower body exercises because they're springier. So let's say we're gonna test 5 people, and first we're gonna get their 1RM in some exercise. Now this is its own problem, and these studies make me laugh because they'll take an untrained individual and be like, "We tested their 1RM." Yeah, bullshit. A beginner can't express a true 1RM, especially in complex movements like squat or bench press, but even on machines. Expressing a true 1RM takes practice, so spare me. Even in folks that are relatively well trained in some of these studies, if they're not practicing a 1RM, you're not going to get an accurate value. It may not be as awful as an untrained, but it's still going to be basically shit. Neither here nor there. Let's assume we can get an accurate 1-rep max test. Now we're going to take these 5 people, and we're going to have them do a maximum number of repetitions at 75%. So in that original chart I put up, it shows 75% at about 10 repetitions. So we test these 5 people, and we have them do as many reps as they can. And let's say these are the results. So these numbers are totally made up. So let's say subject 1 gets exactly 10 reps, as predicted. Subject 2 gets 12. Subject 3 only gets 8. Subject 4 gets 9. And subject 5 gets a whopping 20 repetitions. Again, made up numbers, focus on the principle. Only one of the people got exactly the estimated 10 repetitions. The others, 2 got a little bit less, 1 got a couple more, and 1 got enormously more than predicted. So why is this a problem? So back in the day, 70s, 80s, 90s, and you'll still see them now, programs were based on usually percentage of 1RM. So you would test your, like for power lifters and Olympic lifters, and my high school strength and conditioning coach had this early Apple II program that would do this sort of thing. And you'd see all kinds of schemes. So it'd be some type of progression like this. You know, week 1, 3 sets of 10 at 65% of 1RM. Week 2, 3 by 10 at 75%. Week 3, 3 by 10 at 75%. And then week 4, 3 by 10 at 65%. And the next month it would drop reps and start at a higher percentage or whatever. There's a million. I'm just trying to make the example. This is what a percentage-based program looked like. And presumably the set number and repetition number and percentages are being picked to generate some sort of specific adaptation, whatever that is. And maybe now you can see what the problem is. So we've tested our 5 people at 75%. Only 1 got exactly 10 reps. 2 got less than that, and 2 got more than that. That means that this type of scheme might be perfect for the 1 person, right? By the time they get to week 3, that's 3 by 10 at 75%. So for subject 1, the workout will be a maximal effort. For subject 2, it'll be 2 reps in reserve. For subjects 3 and 4, the workout will be impossible to complete. And for subject 5, it will be 10 reps in reserve or a warm-up set, and they'll be training like Mike Israetel. And that's the fundamental problem. So presumably, when these programs are set up, the reps and the percentages are picked to generate a specific adaptation, whether it's maximal strength or hypertrophy or whatever it is. And when you set it up this way, based on an assumed relationship between reps and percentages, for any given individual, it may be perfect, impossible, or too easy. Now the Russians, which is where a lot of this came from, made it work because they would throw 100,000 athletes into the grinder. And even with average types of workouts, it only has to work for a couple dozen. And then you just need 1 to stay healthy and be able to pass the drug test and to win the goal. And that's why, by and large, I think these types of programs aren't very good. And they don't really work. They might work on the average, but they don't work for the individual. Unless, I mean, I suppose if you want to, test someone and get a true 1RM, assuming they're able to do it, and then determine, test them at 95, 90, 85, 80, 75, 70, 65, which takes days because you can't do it all in one workout. Find out their individual repetition percentage relationship. You could, but if you train a lot of people, how realistic is that? If you're an American football coach and you train 50 people, or if you're a rugby coach and you train similar amounts of people, like you can't do that for every. And it's been suggested, and I want to say it's Fisher and Steele who wrote about this, but don't swear me to that these studies that set percentages, part of the reason they see such variable results is for this reason. Because again, if you give every subject 10 reps at 75%, it'll be the right intensity for some, it'll be impossible for others, and it'll be far too light for a third group. And I wouldn't be bringing this up if there weren't a better way. So let's assume that you believe that certain repetition ranges develop certain parameters, right? Maybe you think 5 is best for maximal strength because your name is Mark Ripito and you can't count any higher than that. Or you think triples are best, or 8 to 12 for hypertrophy. It doesn't matter. Again, just stick with the principles here. How do we solve this problem of this supposed percentage 1RM thing being so variable for people? Well, it's actually pretty simple. The solution is to throw the fucking percentages out. So let's just go, I'm going to say we're going to 10 RM because that's the same example I gave before. I'm going to take these same 5 people, and rather than testing their 1RM and guessing how many repetitions they can do at 75%, I'm going to actually test their 10 repetition maximum. That is, I'm going to find the weight which allows them to do 10 repetitions, full repetitions in proper form, blah, 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 where they would fail on the 11th repetition. Or I'll have them try the rep, and when they fail on 11, I'll know that that was their 10 repetition maximum. Quick aside, I'm not saying you should train to failure. I'm making a point here. Mike Israetel, you're a bold-faced liar for saying that I advocate everyone train to failure for all applications. If you had an iota of intellectual integrity, you would admit that you are a liar, but we both know you won't. Back to it. Now, for those 5 different individuals, that 10 RM will obviously be a different percentage of the 1 RM. That's why they got different reps at 75%. So for couple, 10 reps might be 70%. And for others, it might be 85%. It doesn't matter, the specifics. Again, focus on the principles. The point is that the 10RM is the 10RM is the 10RM. Assuming I want to get whatever adaptations I think a 10RM gives. See my dog? See my dog? That's Maximus. And that 10RM will be the same for all 5 of them. So I could have them train at that level. Again, not advocating train to failure, making a fucking point. Please pay attention. So I might have them do repeat sets of 10 with their 10 RM. More likely, I would give them a training load along the lines of repeat sets of 8 at their 10 RM. So 2 reps in reserve for those who are bad at counting. For all 5 of those individuals, since they're basing off a measured 10 RM, those sets of 8 is an identical workload. If they're good at doing reps in reserve, and most aren't, and y'all certainly aren't, because you don't know what limit sets really are, I could say do sets of 8 at 2 reps in reserve. And that would be the same workload for all 5 individuals in a way that giving them sets of 8 at 75% of 1 RM might or might not be. Because for the one guy who only got 8 reps at 75%, it's a maximum load. For the guy who got 10, it's perfect. For the guy who got 15 or 20, it's a warm-up weight. And setting training relative to those measured RM loads. And you can use percentages too. I could say, all right, we've got your tested 10 RM. I want you to do sets of at 85%. Sets of 10 at 85% of 10 RM. That will be the same for each of those individuals. And that's actually how I set up the training of the powerlifters that I coach, which is after they hit a new peak and go to meet, they start the next cycle at a submaximal percentage of their previous best training max, which is actually higher than their competition max for shit I'm not going to get into. So for example, with Sumi, she would hit a new training max in one cycle, and then her training going into the next cycle would look something like this. So in week 1, she would do 8 singles in the squat at 85% of her previous training max. Week 2, that would go to 87.5% of the previous. By week 3, she'd be at 90% for 8 singles. Heavy, but not grinding, not impossible. Over however many weeks of training we had, I would keep her there, and I would do the single progression just as I described in the previous video, where when I saw that she was ready to go up, I would add weight. Then, going into meet, she would do what I call the strength cycle, which I'm not going to outline here, where she would set a new training max. She would go to meet, dominate, and then we'd reset it at 85% of the previous training max and do it all again. But this was the case where A, she only did singles in the squat and deadlift and mix of doubles and singles on the bench press to begin with. And yes, I was using a percentage, but I was setting it relative to a actual demonstrated training maximum. It wasn't set to some hypothetical repetition range. It wasn't set to some hypothetical estimated poundage. It was set to a weight she had actually done in training. And I just did that to get a little bit of momentum until I tried to grind her into dust. So let me sum that up. So rather than using some sort of average 1RM percentage rep relationship, which may or may not be right for any given individual, what you do is you actually test an NRM load. N is just the rep count, 3 or 5 or 8 or 10. Then you set the training intensity relative to that measured RM load. Some workout examples: 3 by 10 at 10 RM, 3 by 8 at 10 RM, 2 reps in reserve, 3 by 8 at 2 reps in reserve, which is the same way, same as workout 2, and then 3 by 8 at 85% of 10 RM. Doing it that way, the workload and the workouts will be identical for all trainees, since it is anchored to an actually measured RM rather than being based on some percentage. Moving on. Okay, let's finish it up. And this is the section that required me to go do these 3 previous videos on types of progressions because they were necessary background for this. I'm going to focus here on the double progression because I think it's a simpler example. This applies to the single progression, which you have to be really good at reps in reserve for all those reasons I got into. All right, so typically pick a 2 to 5 rep spread. I'm going to use 8 to 12. Since it's a very common example, it's still used a lot in the studies. It's just typical, and what you would typically do is you would, with a given weight, work up from 8 to 12 repetitions. Those 4 reps representing roughly an 8 to 12% gain in strength. And then you would use that to adjust the load, on the bar for the next workout. And you would typically add 3 to 5%, which is admittedly submaximal, but assuming the goal is not to keep yourself grinding at limits the whole time, that's how it's typically applied. Now, this is again predicated on having a 3 to 5% weight increase, which is dependent on what's on the bar, what weight increments you actually have available. All the stuff I talked about in the last videos won't repeat here. Now, you can go further than that. A common recommendation is on that final set to go ahead and rep it out to failure. And I would note here that other people in this industry recommend failure way more than I ever have. Mike Israel's lies notwithstanding. Regardless, let's say you rep it out and you get to 15 reps on that final set. Well, if you've taken a weight from 8 reps and you can now do 15, that 7 rep gain is roughly 14 to 20% increase. And you need to stop sandbagging and add some fucking weight to the bar. Because as it is, you're training like Mike Israel, and unless you're on his drugs, you're not going to grow from that shit. Now, in that case, you could probably add 10% to the bar. Because again, you've been pussyfooting because you've watched too many of his videos and have gotten a false sense of what 0 reps in reserve actually is. But those are examples of how you adjust the load, that'll be the last time, from workout to workout. Here, I want to discuss how you can use this relationship to adjust the load, during the workout. So here, I'm going to use this example workout, 3 sets of 8 to 12 repetitions. And let's say you're trying to keep each set at 2 reps in reserve. Doesn't matter if you're taking them to limit sets. Somewhere, these are hard, challenging sets between 0 and maybe 4 reps in reserve, 1 to 3, somewhere in that range where it's actually, a training stimulant. It would be atypical to be able, for each set to be the exact same intensity, or for you to not drop repetitions, or for the reps in reserve to change. And I'm explaining this very, very, very badly. So let me try to print this visually. All right, so let's say your goal workout is 3 sets of 8 to 12 at 3 reps in reserve. On set 1, you get 12 reps at 3 reps in reserve. On set 2, you only get 10 reps at 3 reps in reserve. And then on set 3, you only get 8 reps because you have to stop at 3 reps in reserve. Now, this is all admittedly within the goal of the workout, those parameters. You stayed within 8 to 12 repetitions. It was just that what I'm trying to demonstrate is that as fatigue accumulates, you're dropping repetitions during the set. Now, how much any individual drops is highly variable. Depends on the person, depends on the exercise. A lot of it will depend on the rest interval. If you use a short rest interval for some dumbass reason, you will drop more repetitions than if you use a longer rest interval. But unless you use an enormous rest interval or training very submaximally, like that dumb shit, sets of 10 at 4 reps in reserve, and the study Mike Israel was on where they had 10 minutes between sets and never dropped a rep, you're going to drop repetition or see the same number of repetitions get closer to 0 reps in reserve, which is equivalent to dropping reps in terms of how the effort is changing. Here would be another example of what might happen. So in this case, rather than maintaining that reps in reserve, the person just cranks out 12 reps. And what you can see is that each set gets progressively closer to 0 reps in reserve, dropping to 1 to 2 on set 2, and then 0 to 1 on the final set. Now, that's not technically within the parameters of the workout, but it might be perfectly fine, depending on how it's set up and what the goal is. Right, that would actually be very similar to in my generic bulking routine, which I typically, for a given exercise, is 3 to 4 sets of 6 to 8 on heavy stuff and 12 to 15 on lighter stuff. The first set might be at 3 reps in reserve, and then it might fall to 2 and 1, and if you do a 4th set, it might actually be a limit set. So again, the point being that you are normally going to drop reps or decrease the reps in reserve if you maintain the reps. So here's just another random example. And again, I'm going to use the F word, failure, but I'm not advocating it. This is to make a point, for fuck's sake. So this is an example that Dr. Ken Leisner, RIP, used to use. On your first set, you're going to go all out for a maximum set of 10. I mean, absolute grinding, could not get an 11 with a gun to your head. Then you're going to take a 60-second rest. If on set 2 you keep the weight on the bar the same, you will generally lose about half the reps. If you want to get 10 reps, you generally have to cut the weight by 50%. And you can absolutely go test this for yourself. Get on something like a chest press machine or something that you can do safely and try it. And you'll see that that's about right. On that short rest interval, after an all-out maximum set, you will lose about half the reps with the same weight on the bar, or you'll have to cut the weight by about 50% to have a chance of getting the same reps. And again, with longer rest intervals, the drop-offs aren't that large. The further away you get from 0 reps in reserve on the first sets, the smaller the drop-offs will be. The point, again, I'm trying to make is that there will be drop-offs, generally speaking. Now, so long as those drops in reps or the decrease in reps in reserve are within the parameters of the workout, you may not care. But there will be cases that it won't be, where the nature of the drops, for whatever reason, may be taking you outside of the goal. So let me give an example of what that might look like. And just because I think it'll make it a little bit easier example, I'm going to use an sample workout of 4 sets of 8 to 10 repetitions, where the goal is 2 reps in reserve on each set. All right, so set 1, perfect, 100 by kilos, pounds, units, rocks, ducks, whatever, by 10 reps at 2 reps in reserve. Set 2 drops to 100 for only 8 repetitions. Still within the parameters of the workout, but having lost 2 repetitions. Set number 3, another 2 reps are lost to 100 by 6 at 2 reps in reserve. And then set number 4 drops to 100 by 4 at 2 reps in reserve as fatigue continues to accumulate. And yes, I'm assuming that the rep drops are consistent across sets for a given individual, and Jesus Christ, why do I have to do this in every single video? This is an example. Let's focus on the principles. What you can see is that after the second set, the workout is no longer within the goal parameters. So, how do we fix it? What you do is use the relationship of reps to percentages to adjust the weight on the bar as you go. So in this first example, after the second set, it's probably pretty obvious that the third and fourth set are going to drop below that goal 8 repetition range. So what you do is you proactively reduce the weight on the bar, and you simply do that by multiplying the number of reps you want to get back by 2 to 3%. So if you've dropped 2 reps and want to get those 2 reps back, you need to reduce the weight on the bar by 4 to 6%. If you want to get 4 reps, then you need to drop the weight on the bar by 8 to 12%. And this will be a little bit easier to see with a visual example. So here's what that looks like. So again, set 1, 100 by 10 at 2 reps in reserve. Set 2, 100 by 8 at 2 reps in reserve. Recognizing that you're dropping 2 repetitions per set, you would proactively lower the weight by 4 to 6%, 95 pounds by 8 at 2 reps in reserve. Then you would lower it by another 5%, so that you don't drop 2 more repetitions and finish at 90 by 8 at 2 reps in reserve. And you just end up with a reverse pyramid. But hopefully that makes sense, that you can dynamically change what's on the bar, either when you drop below the repetition range or proactively, right? Like if you see that, okay, I dropped 2 reps from set 1 to set 2, you're probably going to drop about 2 reps from set 2 to set 3, so just lower the weight on the bar by 4 to 6%. Or you could even take it to a further extreme. So in this case, having dropped from that 100 by 10 on set number 1 to 100 by 8, if you wanted to continue to get 10 repetitions, you would drop the weight by a full 10%, back to 90, and you get 10 again. And then based on the assumption that you're going to drop 2 more reps, you lower it by another 5% to get 85 by 10. And again, you just end up with a little bit more extreme reverse pyramid, assuming you're trying to maintain 10 reps. That might make a little more sense for like a single progression, where you're trying to maintain an exact repetition range, but the same principle applies. And this is a way where you're, like I said, adjusting the load during, and it doesn't matter what reps in reserve you're doing, if you're doing the first set to failure and dropping reps. The point is that based on how many reps you're dropping per set and how much you can predict you're going to drop on the next set, you adjust the weight downwards to maintain your repetition range. Now you can go even further than this, because I think what most people will find is that given a certain exercise, a certain repetition range, and a certain fixed rest interval, that their personal rep drops will probably be pretty similar from workout to workout, like I said, in general. So what another approach you could take would be to first determine how many reps do I drop set to set to set, again, given fairly fixed parameters. Then you know exactly how much to adjust at the next workout to maintain a certain rep range. So here's an example of that. So here I have set it up as a single progression without reps in reserve. So the goal is 100 by 4 by 10 on a 2-minute rest interval. First you do the test workout. Set 1, you get 100 by 10, and you drop 8, 6, 4 reps on each subsequent set. You're dropping 2 reps per set for 4 to 6% decrease. Now you know that at the next workout, to get 4 sets of 10, you need to drop the weight by 5% each set. So you go 100 by 10, 95 by 10, 90 by 10, 85 by 10. It's just that simple. And again, this concept applies to whatever sets of reps and weights and reps in reserve or intensity that you're using. And I know I said it's fairly simple stuff, and it is, even though, I mean, I wouldn't expect the general trainee to necessarily know this, but I do consider this, this rep percentage relationship kind of fairly kindergarten level knowledge. I mean, they use it in studies all the time, and I would certainly expect anyone with a degree or claiming expertise in this field to be aware of this. And I bring this up because I'm a petty asshole, and since he wants to talk shit about me now, I wanted to point out that little Milo Wolf, seen here, was in my Facebook group for about 5 years and never said a goddamn word. And then when that dumb fuck 52 set study came out, I put out my standard challenge that I would pay $1,000 for anyone who could finish it. And he actually stepped up, and I will give him credit for that. And he finished it to a degree well enough that I did send him the money, which I'm sure he's admitted publicly, because the crybabies in this industry are always super honest when it comes to me. But I then offered a criticism because his reps were much lower than what was used in the study. He was falling into the 4 to 5 rep range instead of even the 6 to 8, and I mean, they'd used a 12 to 15. And I kind of mentioned that, yeah, he did it. I mean, I'd note that his training partner, a power lifter, gave up after squats. So it's not like anyone could do it. Milo got through it on 600 milligrams of caffeine, admitted that he's sore than he'd ever been, and then started talking shit. Because after I brought up the fact that in a higher repetition range, it would be much, much, much harder, he got all butthurt, came at me and said, I'd do the workout again if you pay me, which fuck you, because everyone said, if you want to prove Lyle wrong, do it to prove Lyle wrong. And then he said, well, the only reason the reps fell too low is I didn't know how to adjust the weight on the bar. Wham. Anyone with a PhD, anyone involved in clinical research, anyone claiming to have training expertise should know exactly how much to lower the bar. To lower the weight on the bar to maintain the repetition range. Milo, each rep is worth 2 to 3%. When you fell from 6 to 4, that's 2 reps. That's 4 to 6%. That would have gotten you back to 6. But since you were going to drop another 2 reps, you needed to factor in 4 reps, 8 to 12%. You needed to have stripped 10% off the bar with each set. Kindergarten level stuff, bro. But since the only 2 words you know are length and partials, I understand why you're ignorant of this. Having gotten that out of my system, you can use this 1 rep, 2 to 3% relationship to adjust the load during the workout, something little Milo Wolf didn't know how to do and probably still doesn't know how to do, to maintain the reps or the goal intensity based on what's changing. You can either do it dynamically, or you can just test yourself on different exercises, whatever intensity you choose to use, whatever rest interval, figure out what your individual repetition drops are, and you can proactively adjust the weights going forward, set to set to set, to maintain the workout where you want. Oh yeah, one more thing. Another way you can technically use this relationship is if you want to change goal repetition range on a given exercise. So let's say you're currently doing sets of 10 on whatever exercise with 100 ducks. And you've decided, I want to start doing sets of 15. How much do you adjust the weight? Well, number one, you don't ask Milo Wolf because he doesn't know how. But number two, you simply take those 5 reps, that's 10 to 15%, and you're going to reduce that 100 ducks by 10 to 15%. So for a 15 rep set, you should probably start somewhere in the 80 to 85 pound range. That'll be good enough for government work. I realize that technically 10 to 15% should make it 85 to 90 ducks, but when you're moving to higher rep ranges, trust me, just err on the side of a little bit too light. Just trust me on those. That's okay. There's another thing that sometimes people try to do, and that's to go in the opposite direction. Is they go, oh, I want to go from doing sets of 10 to sets of 5. How much more weight should I put on the bar? And this is basically how those 1RM estimate equations work. Oh, you're doing sets of 10 at this weight? Well, we're going to chuck on 25%. That's your 1RM. And it never works. Ever. Especially, it works worse when you're trying to go from very high reps to very low reps. It's a little bit more accurate when the rep counts are closer than so far away. So for example, in this case, here's what our lifter would try to do. So it's the same 5 reps, 10 to 15%. So you would go from 100 ducks by 10 to 110 to 115 ducks by 5. Do not do this, and here's why. The problem with doing this is that it's one thing to go from lower reps to higher reps where you're lightening the weight. When you're going into lower repetition ranges, especially from higher repetition ranges, anyone who's done lots of low rep work will tell you that your focus changes. It can change technically, right? Like on a set of 10, you can fuck about the first 5, 6, 7, 8 reps. If you get a little bit out of position, it's usually okay. When the reps get lower, you have to be that much more technically accurate on every rep. And that takes practice. So if you jump the weight too quickly, you get into a real problem. If you want to move to lower repetition ranges, let's say you want to go from sets of 10 to sets of 5. You just read an article on power building because it came around as the new fad. You want to do it. All right, great. What you do is you take that current weight of 100 ducks for 10 reps and you do it for sets of 5. Maybe 3 to 5 sets of 5 repetitions to get some practice with those lower reps. Then at the next workout, you're going to go up a little bit to 105 ducks for 5 by 5 or 3 by 5. Go up gradually so that it should take you about a month to get to that predicted 115 by 5 by 5. This way you can start to get some submaximal practice with those low repetitions as you bring the weight up gradually to a challenging level. Not to mention, I mean, there's issues with connective tissue adaptation and all kinds of stuff. Just trust me. If you're going to drop from higher reps to lower reps, this is how you do it, rather than using some predicted number based on the percentages. Bad things happen when you do it. And that's all I got. Maybe next time I'll get to one of the endless Q&As I've been ignoring. See you next time. For the record, I neither read nor respond to comments on YouTube or Instagram because I don't care. Mind you, I don't delete comments I don't like most of the weak-minded babies in this industry either. If you think my content is great and want to tell me how awesome I am, fantastic. If you think I'm a dumb asshole and want to call me names, also fantastic. I don't care either way because I have better things to do. If you have questions that you want me to potentially read and or respond to, or most likely ignore, send them to questions@bodyrecomposition.com. Might get to them, might not. It's part of my charm. Oh yeah, I recently added a playlist to my channel. My buddy Solomon Nelson, who does some fantastic videos taking down the cretins in this industry. I've put the link directly to that playlist in the video comments, and you can also find them however you find playlists. He deserves the exposure. Go check him out.